Welcome back to the first team. I am Joe DeLeone, and with me as always, my good friend. Sorry, not my good friend, my co-host, Ryan Roberts. I don't know this man personally. No. You're just my co-host. Today we're doing our first running back scouting report episode. We're slowly coming up on the end of these scouting report shows before we turn the page and we end up doing our official rankings. Should be coming in about a couple of weeks when we start off. The idea is to start off with the offensive tackles. By the way, I forget if I communicated that with you or not.
You did
doing tackle,
but I hear it now. So yeah.
Okay. Well, this is our meeting. This is our backstage conversation that is going to be on the show.
Sure.
We're starting with offensive tackles, so be prepared. If you're not, I'm assuming that you will be.
Oh, I've been ready for months, Joe. You're the one that's behind, dude. I've been ready for months.
Well, actually, I'm very ahead compared to where I was last year. Sure. But yes, I'm probably behind you, who's watched a million more prospects than I have. Today, though, we're going to be talking about Trey Benson, and we're going to be talking about Bucky Irving. Benson from Florida State, Bucky Irving from Oregon. Ryan, let's start off with Trey Benson, the Florida State back, 6'1", 223, formerly at Oregon. Here he goes, ends up at Florida State, finishes at his career out pretty strong. His two really good years back-to-back. Not necessarily a guy who has ridiculous production, but if anything, that helps him, that he didn't have a lot of touches, but with the touches that he had a really good yards per carry number. He had a lot of really explosive receptions that he had. He had a lot of important touchdowns, but overall, very, very well-rounded prospect.
Yeah, and he, obviously an interesting background. I mean, you mentioned the Oregon ties, obviously, but he had a really bad knee injury in his Oregon career, which kind of derailed him for a little bit. He transfers over to Florida State, and it was a really under-the-radar addition because I remember he was coming off the knee and he hadn't played much at Oregon, so they didn't really know what to expect when he got to Florida State. But then he gets to Florida State, and immediately he's one of the better running backs in the ACC and arguably in all of college football. So he brings a really good overall profile is kind of how I would phrase it, right? Like he's going to be 6'1", somewhere in that ballpark. He's going to be 220 pounds, 225 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark, right? He hits the size threshold you like as a early down runner. He also pretty good in space. I mean, like he's not a make you miss in space type. He is a tackle breaker, great contact balance, kind of a bowling ball a little bit when he gets to the open field. But he's done that, and he's had some receiving production as well. So, like, the overall profile, Joe, I think is very appealing for Trey Benson. Again, an early down ball carrier, but he has shown when he's gotten opportunities to work in space a little bit, work as a pass receiver, he's capable of it. Is he ever going to be dynamic? That's the question, right? And I don't know if I would necessarily say he is a dynamic player, but he's just an overall just good football player all around. You know, he has the ability to be a tackle breaker. He has the ability to create some explosive runs. He has the ability to catch the football well out of the backfield. He's a solid enough blocker to be using on third downs. Just not a lot of holes in Trey Benson's game is kind of how I would phrase it.
I remember you compared him to Leonard Fournette when we talked about him over the summer. And I definitely still see that with his physical build. Like he's got huge legs. He's a really strong, powerful kid. I think that
he's got the same like running style too, right? Like he's a little bit of a short stepper, but like he still has plus speed though. So like, even though he's a short stepper, he's still able to create some explosive runs because he still has good speed overall.
He's not as physical as Fournette is the only thing that I definitely wouldn't say, because he actually attempts to try and wiggle a little bit more than Fournette, which might be better for him for his longevity as an athlete to not deal with as many hits. So I tweeted out a clip, taping this on Friday. I tweeted out a clip on Thursday of him and got a lot of random opinions from fans that were thrown in there. And two things that confused me that I didn't agree with that were thrown out there. One, some said that they didn't think he was super bursty, and I disagree with that. I think for a 225-pound back, he accelerates very well. The way that there are a couple times where he's in the hole and he just takes these really good short, choppy steps and is able to pop in and out of those exchanges to then find the next hole. And then the other thing that I was really confused by, that some people were like, yeah, his vision's not very good. I completely disagree. I saw a guy that was very patient at the line of scrimmage, that did a good job of not being too desperate. Yes, he sometimes falls for the east to west trap of going sideline to sideline instead of getting uphill. But when he gets uphill, he does a really good job of finding that lane. And I'm obsessed with the way that he's able to find that secondary lane. There were a couple of runs and ones that I put in this this highlight clip that I put together, where he's going one direction and he sees the lane in the field opening up in the other direction. And sometimes running backs get this tunnel vision where they just keep going forward until they get tackled. I love that he is always going to find the path of least resistance. And I think that he does a very, very good job of it. This is why I'm a really big fan of Trey Benson, that he's not necessarily going to be, a guy who explodes for an 80-yard touchdown every other game. Probably not going to happen. But is he going to string together those 20, 30-yard rushes often because he has the burst and then the size to take a full load of being an NFL back? I absolutely think that he does.
Here's a running back that it might be a better comparison from a full profile perspective than a Leonard Fournette. How about David Johnson that played at Northern Iowa, played with the Arizona Cardinals?
I feel like he's faster than David Johnson, though.
Oh, you're wrong. You were wrong, sir.
How fast was David Johnson?
Look. David Johnson was like a mid 4.4 runner. That guy could fly. He was fast, man. Go look it up.
Oh,
he was at least 4.47, but I feel like he may have ran like 4.45. He was very fast. Former high school wide receiver, David Johnson was. So
4.5. You're in a 4.5. Okay,
no.
He ran it. NFL Combine website says he runs a 4.5, 41.5-inch vertical.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of these 10.7 broad, 6.8 2 3 cone.
That's great.
I actually like the David Johnson comp a lot and you can also see, I think you started to talk about his receiving game impact. I think Trey Benson's a really underrated receiver. The times that they actually utilized him and delivered him the football, I saw that impact. And that was what one of David Johnson's best attributes is that he was able to provide juice as a receiver. So I really like that one. I like that one a lot better than the Leonard Fournette one because I feel like Fournette was so physical compared to Benson.
Well, the Leonard Fournette one was more about his actual gait as a runner, right? Like his short step, he just kind of had like that short stepper feel to his game. But I think because David Johnson was a former high school wide receiver who eventually turned into a 6'1", 224-pound running back coming out of Northern Iowa. And I think the body type is going to be pretty similar to Trey Benson. I imagine Trey is going to be right around 220 to 225, somewhere in that ballpark. I imagine the testing numbers are going to be similar-ish because I agree with you in the fact that he's an explosive cat, man. Like he gets up to his top speed very quickly. I think we could have a great conversation about, is the second, third gear great? I mean, I'd say it's good, right? But overall, he gets to his top speed very quickly, and he's a creative back. He really is. But the thing that David Johnson was so good at when he was in his heyday before he started getting injured and such was he was a really good outside zone type runner, right? Like he was really good at it because he was patient front side, explosive to get vertical, and then he had pretty good vision to hit some cutback lanes at times. And I think that's what Trey Benson does well. Like, I think Trey Benson is pretty patient on the front side. I think he can see cutback lanes, and I think that he's an explosive player going north and south. Like, I think that he can really be an explosive player there. So I think this kid has a chance, Joe. I don't know if he'll ever be top 2 or 3 running back in the NFL good. Like, I'm not sure he'll ever get to that status. But I could see him being a perennial 1,000-yard rusher. Like I could easily see that, right? Like 1,000 to 1,150, 1,200 yards, and he's just like a consistent football player throughout the entirety of his wherever he ends up, obviously. So I think the baseline is very high here. I don't think he's flashy. Like there's no Jahmyr Gibbs in this game where you're just like, holy cow, like that is special. Nothing special necessarily, just all good. Which, I mean, if we're talking about a baseline for wanting in an NFL running back, I mean, I want him to be pretty good at everything because that leaves great sticking point there.
Right. That's what my main argument here is for him. I think early on, I don't see anyone that's going to knock him off as my number one back. I really think that he's going to end up being my number one running back, especially because Raheem Sanders didn't end up declaring and he decides to go back and he was injury riddled. I know Jonathan Brooks gets brought into the conversation, but like
he's coming off the injury.
Guy coming off of a knee injury. I still don't really agree with that declaration on his part because how long until he's fully ready? And a running back is a guy that like it usually that season after the knee injury,
right,
is usually at like 75%, and then you're back at full strength. So I don't know anyone that's going to be excited to invest in that.
I felt like Brooks was trying to cash in on the fact that a lot of running backs did go back to school, where they're just like, all right, let's try to, sneak our way up in a less than stellar. Because I mean, Joe, I don't know if you agree with this. I mean, we're going to talk about the Trey Benson, like slotting. it's not a great running back class. It's really not. I mean, there's some quality runners in my opinion, but like we're going to talk about Trey Benson. I think we just see Trey a little bit differently, right? As far as like the valuation.
Okay.
I would not take any running back in the top 50 this year. I don't think.
Oh, okay.
I mean, like,
so we definitely disagree.
Trey is the one guy that is borderline top 50 player. I think he's a top 64 player. Like, no, like I think he's a top 2 round guy. I just don't see first round player. Like I just genuinely don't see that. I just see a good football player who I don't know necessarily if I would call him a difference maker. I would just call him a key cog in a good system, which again, nothing wrong with that, man. There's a lot of good running backs in the NFL right now. Think about like James Conner, right? James Conner has injury or John Conner. James Conner. Yeah.
No, James Conner. John Conner is the Terminator.
Well, yeah, it's the Terminator, but it was also a fullback out of Kentucky a few years ago as well. But James Conner is like one of those guys where it's like, is there anything star-studded about James Conner? But every time he's healthy, though, he's just good. Like he's a good player. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. So I don't necessarily see I don't see first-round pick Trey Benson. You could argue with me top 50 pick Trey Benson, but I will say top 64 pick Trey Benson. Like that's where I'm at with Trey.
So this goes in line with what I tweeted, but I didn't elaborate on. Yes, this is a little clickbaity. I don't give a shit. You criticized me for being clickbaity. I really don't care. I've moved past the fact that you criticized me for doing
that
it.
It was clickbaity. You are admitting that.
I have always admitted to the fact that sometimes, because anyone who wants to get good interactions on anything in modern media, you need to have a little bit of a hook. You can't just throw out a bland statement.
I'm just mean to people. That's all I do. So
I mean, I am too. To that point though, what I'm saying here,
yeah,
I realistically, and I actually even responded to somebody who said this, I realistically don't see a world where a running back goes in the first round. I don't think that it's going to happen. But I feel like oftentimes when we get to pick like 27 or 28, we end up with teams that are either trying to trade out and can't find a partner, or they do trade out. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a couple of teams that are going to be in that mix that could be looking for a running back to just really round out their offense. So like when I did my mock draft, I look at the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens don't really have any serious needs. They're not going to get to their second pick until the end of the second round.
Right.
To them, they might say, all right, we don't really want to go for and reach on a defensive tackle or to reach on an interior offensive lineman because we don't have anyone here. Let's grab Trey Benson because we want the pick of the group of running backs because there's not a very exciting group and we want someone well-rounded that can play all three downs. They've got really good production out of the guys that they have, but just imagine if they had somebody who was consistent with all the injuries that they dealt with that running back room. So that's the world that I see, that Benson will be the first running back selected. If one goes in the first round, for me, it makes the most sense for it to be him because he is the most well-rounded and the most NFL prepared and built back without too much tread on his tires to fit in that conversation.
So to clarify your points, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So you believe that if there is a running back to go in the first round, it is probably Trey Benson, 1. 2, if he does go in the first round, it's because he's a luxury pick, right? Like he's not necessarily a first round player in a vacuum. It's like the Clyde Edwards-Helaire pick a couple years ago for the Chiefs. It's like the Chiefs didn't have a lot of glaring leads. Yeah. Let's take a running back.
Or Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny to the Seahawks a couple of years ago, and that didn't end up working. Actually, neither of those ended up working out. But
can you imagine if the Chiefs would have drafted Jonathan Taylor or DeAndre Swift instead? That would have been a great selection there.
Oh my God.
The first round. But yeah.
Well, but to that point though, I feel like Benson has less holes than Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Rashad Penny did that were kind of those reach picks. You know, like Edwards-Helaire was tiny and contacts balance issues and whatnot. And then the other side of that is, Penny just was overrated as shit. But that's my point here. It's like, I kind of wonder if because he's more balanced, he could fit into that conversation a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's possible. I mean, I'm just struggling with this running back class, to be honest with you, Joe. Like, I just see a lot of good. I don't see a lot of spectacular, a lot of great. Like, that's just kind of where I'm at with it. You know what I mean? Because I always think that and I'm not saying you're doing this, because the NFL teams literally do this every single year. But when there's not a star at a position, guys get pushed up naturally. And it's a flawed thought process by the NFL teams, because I feel like they reach a little bit for a need compared to a player specifically. But again, I agree with you in the sense that if there is a running back that is going to be valued somewhere in the top 50 picks or even first round, I think it's probably going to be Trey Benson, barring an injury setback to the knee or the medical stuff, right? So he does have the best all-around profile in this class, in my opinion. And yeah, so I agree with you in that sense.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. Bet online, where the game starts.